So thanks so much for coming and for coming out and essentially learning about the new system. So looking forward to sharing it with you all. Just a quick intro. Yesterday I was giving a talk. Maybe some of you saw it. Sort of looking about the future of APIs and how we building APIs in 10 years. In a nutshell, I was just talking about sort of two parts, like specialization of platforms for building APIs, and actually democratization, like being able to have more people build APIs. And this is what we do, right? So it's very much a tool that goes in that direction. And this is one such specialized platform focused on building a very specific type of APIs, and we'll see that today. So again, thanks for coming. My name is Miguel Branco. I'm with Raw Labs, so it's a startup based in Switzerland. What you're about to see was essentially a product that was in beta until recently, since the beginning of the year. We went GA about 8 weeks ago, so also very much looking forward to your feedback, and maybe you get a chance to try it out. A bit about the company, right? So it's a spin-off from an academic setting from university. For many years, I was myself working at CERN on big data and managing, distribution of very large petabyte scale data sets. Then I joined research, met the other co-founders, and that's how this project came about. About the company, right? We're from Switzerland, from Lausanne. If you know, that's the home of Scala. Martin Odersky, one of the advisors to the company, the creator of Scala. Another one, Mike Franklin, which is the founder of the Apache Spark project. It's another advisor to the company. And you sort of see also a bit of a genesis of a data company as well, right? So, and again, thanks for coming about learning about us. So the idea of today is to just go through an introduction, let you know what Raw is about, and how does it compare, what you could use instead, in a way. Quick demo, and we have a few of those, touching a few parts. The demo will be about rapid prototyping in Raw. That's just a very easy example, a very easy way to get started with the system and understanding what it is about. Then we're going to take sort of a step back and okay, now you'll have a much better idea what this is about, and let's talk about designing and implementing data services in Raw. And we'll cover the journey from sort of the solo developer, starting in the beginning, playing with the system, scaling up all the way to a very large enterprise. Then, share a bit of roadmap, also because we will want your feedback, hear what you have to tell us, and then just some conclusions, right? So what is Raw? Starting very, very high level. So, essentially, if you will be interested in using it if you need to speed up some digitalization initiatives that you may have. So, and if you're looking particularly through improved access to integrated data, about data integration. And also something very common is if you need to augment or actually create a data engineering function, but you don't necessarily have the people. And if you want effectively a modern and lightweight solution to do those. And of course, our goal is, in the end, is to making secure and high performance data delivery easy to do and reachable to everyone and certainly to all the developers. Now, how does it compare? What could you use instead, right? So today you may be using, or you may be considering, creating your own solution. You can code it yourself. Try to chain a set of tools together and try to create something that's specific to you. You may be looking, for instance, into query accelerators. If you need to serve data to others, build APIs. You may be looking to data integration tools. You may be looking into iPaaS solutions. You may be looking into putting all of those together into a solution. And instead, I think you can definitely look at us, right, as an end-to-end, fully managed, lightweight platform that covers all of those parts. And just the punchline here comes from us, but also comes from how Gartner in particular sees us at the intersection of low-code, API development, and iPaaS solutions. That's kind of where we are positioned. So just a quick overview of the system. Again, very high level. We'll get to demo and to details soon enough. It's, really three parts. You connect to your data sources. We have a series of native connectors and open source connectors. Then you build in our platform your APIs, which will cover essentially 5 steps, right? Querying data, integrating data, serving data, also doing invitations and entitlements, and as well monitoring and auditing. And we'll be serving that. So it's a SaaS solution, fully managed, running, as you can get a hint, on Amazon. And then on the final side, we build APIs that then business users would use, right? Something like Tableau or Excel or Power BI, or the technical users would hook up into their own systems. So again, offered as a cloud service, fully managed and scalable. A typical use case is, again, always when there is data integration involved, but also data augmentation, where you have, some data sources. Perhaps you have, something we see happening quite a bit. You have logs, for instance, on CloudWatch, and monitoring your production systems, and you need to augment some information there with data that comes from your operational databases. And you need to build an API to power a dashboard. Right, so it's a very good solution to do those sorts of solutions. Again, developer first, very much focused on rapid prototyping as well, as you will see. But also for people and organizations, and they have some systems in place, and they don't have an API over that system. So they need to build an API over that. So we also see that quite a bit. So I think the easiest thing to have a good grasp of what the system is about is just go through a quick demo. And just before we start giving you a demo, just to be clear for everyone, so the platform is free to use once you signed up. There's a default starter plan. No credit card required, so you can try it out. And these are the steps, what we're going to go. We're just going to go to our main website, as users will do, because it starts for free. Start in our API hub, which I'll get to explain. Pick up an example and get started. So I'll just do that now. Hopefully, yeah, I think. Now I have a bit of a challenging that I cannot see. I think I have to change my settings to mirror, because otherwise I cannot see myself. Okay, hopefully, just give me a second. Okay, so everything seems to be good. Okay, so we'll just get started. So the first thing you're going to see is an API hub, right? And as the page says, it's a place where you can discover, build, and deploy APIs. And essentially, what we'll be doing here, right, is starting from existing examples. So the easiest way to create an API, right, for the first time, is to pick up an existing example and start from there, right? So just for the purpose of demonstrations, I'm just going to be creating a mock API, because I know there's some interesting examples here. So just can choose mock, I'll pick up CSV, and you have, CSV example here. And there's a description of these examples, and you can eventually create your own, or we provide a big sets of them. We'll go through them in a second. And this just shows you, right, what this example is about. It's essentially building a mock API from a CSV file, picking up a CSV file, creating an API out of it, and that is just a simple way to build a mock API, right? Mock APIs can read data from files, from database. They can return hard-coded data. We have examples covering all of that. In this particular case, it's an example that's going to be reading data from a CSV data set that's stored in an S3 bucket. It contains information on airports. That's not super important, but just mentioning it. And then building an API out of that. And you have the indication on the source code and so forth and how the system would work, but just click create your own. And I already have an account, so I can just log in. But otherwise, you would be sent to a sign-up page the first time you do that. But otherwise, you will see the exact same thing that I'm seeing here. And if I continue, let me just try to change the scale a bit. So hopefully that's still very readable. So now we are now in our application. So it's, again, running on the web. It's a development environment on the cloud. Everything is integrated here. Everything is ready to go. And what happened when I create the example, effectively, it went to our, to our system, to our organization, and it created, from that example, already created an API. This API currently is a draft, so it's not published, right? And you actually see the source code of it. Now, you may have questions about the language. If you're seeing the source code that's involved here, we'll talk about that in a second. I actually have a whole section on that. But essentially, just going through this is a catalog where you can edit your APIs, right? You can edit your title, your description. You can manage credentials, because after all, we may be serving data from operational systems that you may have. So we'll be able to read from those. This case, for instance, it's an S3 bucket. You may need to set access keys and secret keys to be able to fetch data from there. There's even some, built-in documentation. We'll get to that in a second as well. And then also part of defining the API is actually the path, right? And the settings behind it, right? Computational class, because again, we are serving it, so how much compute do you have associated with it? Cache sizes, computational time, so how long the API may do be compute before it's cut off. Cache expiration, the output format that we provide, some metadata on licensing in terms of service, all the things that are needed eventually actually to create a catalog as well, as you'll see in a second. And security, which could be private or public. And private, you have a whole set of options to manage that as well. So at this point, again, the API does not exist. It's just an example that we pre-created from the example we chose in the API Hub. But just to give you an idea of the integration that is possible when you start building a vertical solution for a particular use case, it's kind of the theme here, is that there's an entry point called main, receives an argument, which is IATA, which is the international code for airports, the shorthand form of an airport name. It's reading, again, a CSV file from an S3 location, and the CSV command has a whole bunch of information documentation built in. And it's doing a filtering, right? So effectively, it's filtering all the airports in our data set that have the particular code that we're looking for. Now, we could just run that and get a result, right? Because there's a call here. We're passing LIS, which is the IATA code for the Lisbon airport in Portugal. And it's just an example. We can play with it any way we want. We can, for instance, go here and just remove, and I actually want to see the country, right? And what's kind of interesting seeing here is that we are even providing you things like auto-completion. Right? This is reading an S3 file, a CSV file from S3, but there's an integration with the system that we are able to go to S3, detect the schema, right? And be able to provide you visual guides. So it's all about giving that developer experience, right? So you may be building APIs over systems you've never seen before. You don't even necessarily know the schemas or the structures. So the integrated development environment goes all the way to inspecting the data sources and what they are about, right? So now I'm changing it to be about country, and of course this should be country as well. System's going to complain because there's no country, because I'm still passing. So I can change here, and if I want to run the test, right, again, since we're in Lisbon, I can just change it for Portugal and play, and then I should be able to see more airports, because Portugal has more than the Lisbon airport, of course. And there you go. Now, this is about, again, making APIs very, very easy to build. And behind this, there's a lot going on, right? And we'll get to touch that. But it's effectively this domain-specific language is encapsulating many, many steps. And, it's about what it makes easy to do, right? As opposed to worrying about security or closing files or open files or discovering S3. There's a lot that's happening behind the back here. Now, if we're happy with it, and just for the sake of a demonstration, we can just publish it, right? And this would, assuming the network or the demo gods are happy with us, we'll publish an API, and then you can actually see it live on a catalog. So now we have a published API. This is the metadata, which we should have edited. We can go back and edit it This is the description. That's the code. We get to see the code because we are, we are logged in as the producers, so we get to see everything. If you were logged in as a consumer, you would not be the source code, right? You just see the metadata behind it. Settings, security settings, license, everything is there. And maybe you can even, again, just for the sake of it, even pass it from here, and then it should, return the output. So what we did here effectively was, create, very, very quickly, just to give you a very brief view of the system. This is not a very interesting API. It's really an example, right? But picking up how quickly you can go from having an idea, playing with it, typing a few lines of code, publishing it, and having it ready to go, right? Now, let me go back to we'll get to see more demos, right? This is just the first step. Going back to the slides here for a moment. So a key part of the system is actually the language that was used to define those APIs, right? We were doing CSV and read and infer from S3 and being able to get that data served so quickly. Now, that language is called Snappy. And essentially, our take on what we think is a better language for building APIs. So it is a data-oriented language, and if we start putting our academic hats, it's a type-safe language. It's a functional language designed to manipulate data. Effectively, it's about filtering, combining, integrating, and transforming data from multiple sources. So a typical scenario, query multiple files, join them, data on files, data on databases, data on S3, data on data lakes, data on other APIs, and being able to join all that together. And why creating a new language? Essentially because it's easier. It's easier to mash up and serve complex data. A few lines of Snappy, those 2-3 lines of Snappy can be hundreds of lines or more of code in other languages. Also because it's safer to develop production level services. Things about like forgetting to close file descriptors or no pointer exceptions or forgetting to handle exceptions, that's all handled for you, right? The language is extremely safe and has all kinds of built-in protections to prevent you from doing those typical mistakes that one would do programming JavaScript, Java, Scala, or using any other tools, right? And also because, again, it provides the best integrated development experience. So you saw a little bit of that. We're talking about that data detection, detecting the columns of the CSV file live as you are typing. That auto-completion effect. That's the sort of thing that's only possible when you have like a very deeply integrated solution where your platform, your compiler, your query engine are all coming together to give you that experience. So we can just take a look at some more snappies, as we call them. So we call the language Snappy, and we call the APIs we build snappies, obviously a play on the word APIs as well. And we have a few more examples on the API Hub that we can go through. These examples are tagged, always being added and always being contributed to. There's things, there's a tag called tutorial, which is actually more of learning how features of the system, right? How do I query web services, and how do I filter, or how do I handle complex nested data? How do I order roles? So on and so forth, right? So there's many, many examples of that nature, which is more like an introduction to the system, if you want to learn a bit more about it. Of course, you have then use cases, right? You want to build an API out of a JSON data set. You want to build a mock API. That's the one we just did. You want to join on-prem with cloud databases, for instance. So that's something that's actually very, very concise to do as well. In this example, for instance, we have you have data on two separate databases, 2 separate tables, and you want to join them to. Sorry. So it stopped mirroring. Thanks for that. Thanks for letting me know. Okay. Yes. So I was going through the examples here, right? I was mentioning the tutorial where you get to see a little bit on examples if you want to just see capabilities of the system, of the language itself. More interesting, I would say, are the use cases, right? So again, you want to build a mock API, you want to build an API of a JSON data set. You know, the example I was just picking up was you want to join on-prem and with cloud databases, right? Where there's an example here describing something, a scenario. You have two tables in two different systems. You want to join them together. You don't necessarily want to put up an ETL pipeline just for this one use case, right? So how can I do that quickly? And you know, there's the code behind it. We're not showing, there's a whole system behind to manage credentials, we can talk about that, but just gives you a very, very simple example to get started, right? So if you're not familiar with the system, to have something to start with, and then you can compose it your own way. But in this case, we're effectively picking up a database of trips. I'll actually pick up this example later, and airports, and actually performing a join between the two, right? And for people who are used to doing data manipulation, data wrangling, so again, people who have a data engineering experience or needs, a lot of the terminology or the behavior that you see here will be very familiar to them, right? If you're familiar with the Spark world, if you're familiar with M language, or you know, pandas and so forth, you'll be able to very quickly get started on the system. And various other examples we can go through. There's other examples which are more technical in nature, just to give you the breadth of what there is available. For instance, things more technical, right? You want to retrieve logs from CloudWatch, right? So somebody asks you to build an API that needs to retrieve logs and populate the dashboard, or you want to populate Grafana with logs coming from your production system. So if you're using CloudWatch as a way to store your logs on Amazon, that's an Amazon AWS service. Then you have here an example to get started that will give you now everything to get started with an example, and then the source code and an API. You start with that, you customize it, you do the joins you want, the integrations you need to do before moving along. We have also examples, again, just to have an idea, covering even SEO use cases, right? So again, this is, you know, you want to build an API, part of your internal monitoring system, that assesses the mobile friendliness of your website. And sometimes these things needs, and that's kind of common in what we do, right? You always have some custom business logic that's very custom to your needs, right? It's not like an off-the-shelf solution you find, right? And if you need to do those, again, you have examples to get started, and you know, they're all very concise in general. This is actually doing a query over the Google Search Console and just getting the information you need, and from there on, you know, you could build up and do the integrations you need to do. So, encourage you to get a peek at those examples, right? If you're interested in looking into the system, because they would give you, examples, even Oracle and connectors and so on and so forth. So going back to the presentation for a moment. Okay, so now, you know, what we've seen so far was purposely something very, very quick and easy to get started. And some would say, and correctly so, quick and dirty, right? And if you talk about the journey of API development, right, you're going to need more than this, right? And the idea is to provide you a platform that evolves with you as part of your API development journey. And we talk about this internally as having two experiences, right? The in-browser experience is what I just showed you. It's great for first-time users. You want to play with the system, you want to get to know it. If you have a very small project or an urgent issue to solve, that's the way to go, right? If you have a very small team, that may be completely satisfactory. But of course, you know, there has to be more than that, right? It's sort of an enterprise experience for larger projects, larger teams coming together and using the system. So again, this in-browser experience, what you've just saw, it's wonderful because as a developer, you can actually solve a problem very quickly, right? Somebody's asking you, please, you know, feed me this Grafana dashboard. Please provide this data for this other system, right? Please find me this now, right? And you have something that allows you, gives you the tools to be able to focus on solving that problem and not worry about anything else. And that is our recommendation for first-time users. So actually, when you onboard into the system, that's exactly what you're going to see, what you're going to get. And again, it's wonderful if you have this cycle, which is how you should start anyway, right? Which you are still designing, right? But that you are designing and you are prototyping and you are implementing and validating and you're going this cycle, right? And that's okay. But of course, you know, it's very difficult to collaborate if you are just editing code in the web browser. It's very difficult to test. It's very difficult to version API changes. It's very difficult to securely manage credentials, right? And many other cons, right? I think the list of cons is kind of obvious, right? It's very simplistic solution, really for first time, very, very small teams. But of course, you have to then scale this to an enterprise. And at an enterprise level, you have many other concerns, right? And this is just a few of them. You want to have ways to collaborate effectively. You want to have API testing. You want to have CI/CD. You want to have proper management of API versions. You want to have code evolution. You want to have secure management across teams, whether it's credentials or source code, you know, issues tracking, and so on and so forth. And we do have a solution for that. And it really, again, is very developer friendly, right? Trying to use tools that they know. And in this case, it's two very tactical integrations we have in our system. One is with GitHub, which I'll get to show in a second. Another with VS Code, which is kind of becoming the default IDE for most developers nowadays. And we've built extensions to both of those, and that will allow you to give the full enterprise development experience in raw in our platform. So again, time for a quick demo. And let me just, okay. So before we were editing code in the browser, right? Now we're in GitHub. And in the way you would use the system, right, is that you will have a repository of snappy code. This is the example, effectively. This repository has a certain specific structure. For instance, there's the top level file called rawsite.yaml, which specifies some properties about, you know, the raw version, publish URL, sort of the base path of the APIs being created here, if you get the idea. So this is about creating that programmatic way to define APIs. We'll see how this all comes together in a second. And then there's some subdirectories. There's, okay, the README file. There's some directories, one called one, which is actually, you know, the GitHub path will become the API path, right? And the YAML file will become the endpoint name. So it's going to be 1/trips or 1/trips detail, right? So these YAML files will effectively be processed by the system. And if we go into the trips YAML file, it's essentially a programmatic way of defining the same things we had in the web version. So we define the version of the YAML file itself. It's a get endpoint, which you could define on the web interface. This is the title of this endpoint, the metadata, right? A longer description. These are some tags, terms of service. All of these were fields that you would see in the web page as well that you could edit. License, so it's snappy, and it's running a declaration called trips in a file called code.snappy. So this is where we link this definition with the source code. So this is a get that is going to execute a file called code.snappy, but it's actually going to run a declaration called trips. While in the web browser, we're running a declaration called main. Here you can actually customize what it is. Produces JSON, security is public true, and it's enabled, and there's even some tests associated with it. So then if we look at the code.snappy, you sort of see the, you know, trips is effectively just doing one query over a Postgres database, right? And it's using environment secret, which is effectively reads our credential storage, so that the source code does not have any credentials in it. And it's reading a schema, database, sorry, a schema name, and the table name, running at that host. And this is what executing that API is going to end up executing, right? So this is just a same way of doing what we were doing in the web API, but doing it, you know, in a different environment. And the way that then this comes together with raw is that there is an application for GitHub, which you can actually, we have a pointer here, and this application provides integration with raw. And the way that this works is that once you configure this application, what it does, and I can just go here just to give you an example, you basically authorize our platform to scan your repositories. Just has some read permissions on it. Typically, you select a few repositories that you want us to read. And at that point in time, our platform is able to effectively scan these repositories for any changes and be able to serve APIs directly out of it. So again, fully serverless, nothing to set up. You just define it, you do the link, and the system is ready to be used. I'm not going to do it because it's already done. And once you do that, now we can actually look at the other components of the platform, right? There's this component here, this tab here called repositories. And this actually links, we have, this is an internal demo organization we have. And you actually see here that, the system is configured, the platform is configured to, look at that particular repository, right? And there's monitoring available, and it's active. It means it's actually actively inspecting what's happening in the repository. We get webhooks from GitHub, essentially, saying there's a new commit, there's a new pull request. So we start serving it. And automatically, we create these APIs, again, by reading the repository. So if I go to the catalog again, and if I just filter through GitHub, and I suppose there's an API days. I suppose I haven't published yet. Oh, it's here, API days. So that's actually the API being served by that repository. So it's visible here. Now, you can see the code because, again, we have permissions to see into GitHub and the settings. Of course, I cannot edit here because it's served by GitHub, right? So you have to go to GitHub to edit it. So the way you can do that is the second integration we have, which is pretty key to the experience, is actually with VS Code. And let me see if I can make this a bit more visible. Okay, so we do have, and that's actually linked, right? We have a VS Code extension as well. So that's the other piece of the puzzle, which is all about the developer experience, right? So we have a VS Code extension in the VS Code marketplace for raw, just as we have a raw extension for the GitHub marketplace. And this allows you to, start building and editing APIs and give you, again, the same sort of developer experience, but now inside GitHub. So, as a simple demo, right, this is a checkout, a clone of that repository. And now we can start to see how teams could work together, right? Because you could have a team of developers working on a repository or multiple of them, modifying, making pull requests, and so forth. So you can do an example here where we do, API days, demo API demo. I'll just call it demo. Just create a new branch. And, it could be modifying this definition. So I just create a new branch, and I would go here. Suppose I would go and to the trips detailed, and I have a few examples I can play with. So this is actually doing a join between a Postgres database and MySQL database. And I suppose I could just go here and do a little bit of snappy code, right? And I'm doing a join. Let's say I want to change this API, and I want to filter, right? Not return just everything, the full Cartesian join, right? But I want to do a filter between, let's say, the join data, and let's say I want to apply a regex that's gonna match. And you get the same sort of developer experience here as well, right? It's gonna match the country against some pattern, right? Of course, pattern has to exist. I have to define it. And I'm going to be, this is not a very, API one would necessarily take as a perfect example, but just serves the case. Just adding a pattern field. So besides joining Postgres and MySQL, trips with airports, I'm going to apply a filter that's going to apply just a regex pattern on it. And just to make the API backwards compatible, I just put a default value, which is everything, right? Just for the purpose of the demonstration. And actually then we can run tests over it, right? So, we have some tests on the API, which you can click to run, and you can see them executing. Okay. And we can actually create one more test, right? Because although we're not going to be asserting the actual results, just for simplicity's sake, simple arguments test. So I'm going to description, simple test with arguments, and I'm going to pass in some arguments, and I have to pass a key, which is a pattern field. That's what we called it. And the value, I happen to know that, if I use Iceland, there is actually an entry that matches, right? So there's a trip that somebody did to Iceland, right? You can run the tests, you can check, you can see the results, everything is good, right? So saving the files. And now you can actually do the sort of the full GitHub integration where we go in and say, okay, new perimeter to the trips detailed. And we can commit and push. So there's 2 files changed. So it's asking me, saying, okay, I don't have a demo branch on GitHub. And now, if we go back to GitHub, so that's the wrong repository, API demos. You see that there's a new branch, right? That's just GitHub working normally. So we can make a pull request and, just use the default commit message. I'm going to create a pull request. And what's interesting here is that there's checks being done, right? So our platform came in and ran the tests that we had defined in the YAML file and approved it. Therefore, it's green. Everything is ready to go. So we could actually merge it, right? Not only that, if you actually go back to the catalog itself, you would find, for some reason I cannot get the, I guess that's the demos. Okay, you would find that branch published. So you will notice, right, that there will be, and this you can set up in the raw site YAML. For simplicity's sake, I'm not getting into that. But what happened here is that before the URL was called apirolabs.com/apidays/1/trip. So now there's a demo. That's the branch name, right? So the default configuration is that a pull request appends the branch name to a part of the URL. You can have full control over that, right? That's just one option. You can have full control over that. But that even allows you to be able to deploy test APIs, run them, have somebody else validate them with a slightly different URL, and then when you merge, they go into production, and they become your production API. And again, the reason behind all this, right, this integration is that because we are also virtualizing data and serving data, you often need to change multiple APIs at the same time. Right, there's a new version of a system, and you need to change multiple endpoints. And the system guarantees a single atomic transition between states where all the APIs change at the same time, right? Because this reflects essentially your GitHub commit history state, which then allows you as a team, right, to ensure that you're managing all these services together, and they all always work coherently, and you can create new versions. So, yeah, those are the steps we just did, right? Again, we looked at the integration between raw and GitHub, then the extension to VS Code. We effectively cloned the repo, create a new branch, made changes to it. We were able to test it locally. Well, even though our services are running on the cloud, create a GitHub pull request. You could test in an integration environment. We didn't, again, get to see all of that, but just in a very simplified setting. Then we didn't get to merge and deploy, but you get the idea. You would merge, the new endpoint would be then available, and then the branch would disappear, right? So that's in a nutshell, like the capabilities for enterprise integration. So what's next for raw? you know, we want to hear from you, but I can already tell you some of the things that we've been hearing since in the last 8 weeks. So I'm looking forward to your own thoughts. More integrations, right? In terms of connectors, you know, we have connectors to pretty much all the major systems out there in terms of databases, data lakes, and files, right? I think it's fully covered. You know, this is we didn't show a design-first approach. We do have a proposal there where instead of like creating the GitHub repo yourself, you effectively start from your open API definition, because you should start with design first anyway, right? So you have your open API, your Swagger files, and we have a tool that will generate a GitHub repo for you that reflects that with already mock code, and then you can just hook in the parts you want. We've been hearing about integration with gateways, and also more API analytics. We have this vertical platform, right? And that means we can introspect the source code. We can know exactly which data sources an API uses. And then if an API uses other APIs built in raw, we can go all the way in and know exactly where this piece of data came from, because we have full control over the stack, right? Something that has been, you know, being talked about very recently, right? These API AI copilots to help you write snappy code. We've actually done experiments on that, extremely promising. And more API visualization tools, where you know, we look at the codes, but we give you a visual representation of what's going on, right, as well. So those are just some of the ideas, right? But again, we want to hear from you. And in fact, we want to hear from you so much that we'll be willing to, you know, give a small prize. So there's a mailing list called Apidays@rollabs.com. And I would just urge you to submit your suggestions for new API Hub examples, snappy ideas, any feedback you may have on the platform. Submit it to us by email. Don't send your email, your postal address in the first email. I don't want to deal with GDPR compliance issues. We'll reach back to you after. Well, we already have a stock of this. And you know, we're just happy to hear from you. And you know, maybe you get a chance to win a pair of Apple AirPods Pro, the 2nd gen, the new ones. No promises you'll get them before Christmas, okay? So don't assume that's your, you know, you have a Christmas present there. There's just shipping issues. But please try it out. Let us know what you think. And just in conclusion, right, Raw is this end-to-end, fully managed, lightweight, modern platform for building data APIs. It's much faster, and I hope we managed to demonstrate that today, than build your own, or using some heavyweight, or some would say heavy waste iPaaS and data integration tools. It scales with your development needs, and that has been key to our approach. You can start super simple and play with it, and you can go all the way to very complex integrations. And again, all about making secure and high performance data delivery easy and reachable to all. So thanks so much for attending. That's my Twitter handle, GitHub handle, YouTube handle, Mastodon handle. So if you want to reach out, and don't forget to submit your feedback. And thank you so much for your time. Yeah, any questions?
I have a question.
Sure. I think there's.
Yeah. The first question is, do we have like a two-way integration between catalogs and GitHub? For example, if I create catalog, can I generate the code base YAML, the YAML configuration, or it works like in just one way?
Yeah, so what we have in mind right now is one way, right, which is from like OpenAPI, if that was a question, OpenAPI or Swagger.
No, between GitHub and the interface catalogs. Like if I begin to create a catalog, can I generate the code base? Or
Export, right? People have asked about that. Yeah.
Okay.
We don't have that right now, but we're looking into it. That's yeah.
Okay.
To export and turn it into a GitHub repo. Yes.
Okay. And the second question. Is the purpose to only query data, or we can also write data to that?
You can write that, right? The language will, you know, there's our constructs, right? It's very much, this is right, that's a language very much for data wrangling, right? But you can definitely be writing and updating and so forth,
okay.
Right?
And we have also HTTP clients to call another APIs if you want.
Exactly, right. So you can consume all HTTP, all HTTP APIs are very easily accessible from here, so that you can do as well. We also generate client code, didn't get to show that, but that's all covered.
That was all, thank you.
Cheers.